So somebody the other day was harassing me about my hiring policy because I hired them. They turned out to be a great employee, and they said, well, there wasn't really an interview process. You called and said, do you want the job? And that is true. I have this really kind of strange practice of an interview process. The interview process was getting to know the person beforehand. And what I discovered is this. I distrust resumes. Sometimes over my history, I've looked at resumes or we decide by committee. My favorite way of deciding about who to hire is just meet with the people. Because years ago, I hired somebody and I wasn't really looking seriously at this person because I was looking at the resumes, and then I just met people one by one. But the person who I didn't really take serious, they were a go-getter. I mean, they were just like, they are ready to go. And I was like, yes, that person. Turned out to be the best hire. Is somebody who really wants to work. You hire somebody like that, I just think it's always a win. Resumes may look impressive, but you really want to hire a go-getter, somebody who wants to work. And I mention that because it reminds me of the Ascension. The Ascension really is about us getting to work. Jesus ascends so that we can start getting to work. And so every time you hear the word ascension, don't think about Jesus floating up. Think about, okay, now it's our turn to start working. And another example is, I always think this is so funny. Some close friends of mine a couple years ago, their son graduated from college. So they go to the graduation, and they're talking to their son, and their son says, well, you know what I'm thinking about doing is taking the summer off and traveling through Europe. And the parents were kind of shocked, and they said, well, wow, that sounds great. I don't know how you're going to afford that. And he says, well, wouldn't you continue to pay? And the parents were both completely shocked at this point because they worked hard and full time. And they said, no, you seem to have misunderstood. Our deal was this. We'll pay for your college education, but after that, you're flying the nest. And the son kind of gets upset. And he says, what, you mean I have to return to Boise and live in your basement? And the father says, oh, I wouldn't worry about living in the basement. You're not going to be living there. And he said, you don't understand. We're done. We're not working full time so that we can pay your rent anymore. Our deal was to bring you to maturity. After this, you're welcome to sleep anywhere in the world you want, but now it's time for you to get to work. And he actually, I have to say, turned out really well, very productive, but needed kind of the boot in the rear end speech that, no, this is the deal. Now you ascend to being a worker. That's what the ascension means. So think about this. In the gospel today, Jesus, it's called the Great Commission. Before he ascends to heaven, he commissions them with work. The whole idea there is that we have work to do. In the work, he says, go out and baptize all the world in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And it's not just about doing baptisms. It's not just about making converts. The idea there is that we're supposed to be this force that builds the beloved community. The beloved community is this idea of all humanity is supposed to be one loving family. Christ, in today's gospel, is directing us out, not just to convert people, but to convert the world into the beloved community, that we're taking care of each other. And so 9 days later, after the ascension, what do? What happens? They baptize people at Pentecost. And next week, we too are going to be doing the same thing. We're going to be baptizing, I think, over 80 people. Or at least welcoming them into the beloved community. That the Ascension celebrates now we're hired to do work. Or the first reading from Acts, it's really a beautiful reading. But in Greek, what it says is Luke is writing. Luke wrote 2 books, the Gospel of Luke and the book of Acts. And he says in Greek, he says, in my first book, I told you what Christ did with the 12. In my second book, I'm saying what Christ did through the 12. The second book is us, where now Christ is working through us to build the beloved community. And so, like, sometimes people think, well, to be a Christian, all you have to do is preach love. That is completely incorrect. You have to build the beloved community. The kid that graduated from college, it's not good enough to get just a diploma. Now you have to get to work. And I know this priest, he's a good person, he's a nice person. And if anybody asked, he always preaches love. But the thing about it is, he's great at preaching love, but don't ever count on him. When things get rough, he only takes care of himself. He basically spends his day kind of sitting around watching TV. He's not really caring to work. If he has to celebrate Mass, it's going to be a nice Mass, and he's going to preach love, but he never really works very hard. And did you notice in the first reading, Jesus commissions them and then ascends into this cloud. And they're just standing there looking at the sky, not doing anything. And this is almost humorous, where two angels have to come and say, "Stop staring at the sky! Get to work!" I kind of think some angel needs to go to this priest and say, "Stop staring at the TV! Get to work!" It's, yes, the boot in the rear end. But we're the ones who are supposed to be working. And the priest, God bless him, he does preach love. But that's not good enough. What Christ needs is workers who will build the beloved community. And oddly enough, this priest, every assignment he ever has had ends up into this dead zone of non-activity. And I came across this study I thought was interesting, that in the United States, religions that demand some sort of commitment and work actually survive the best. They won't be the most popular, but people that demand commitment and work, those religions tend to survive. They're not popular. What's popular is just preaching about love but doing nothing. They may be popular, but oddly enough, they disintegrate over time. It's not good enough that we just preach love. We're the ones who are supposed to be the workers, who are supposed to be changing the world into the beloved community. So 40 days after the resurrection is the ascension. And every time the number 40 comes up in the Bible, it means people are ready for a new beginning. So for 40 days after Easter, Jesus is always appearing at the breaking of the bread, at Mass. Jesus is teaching them for 40 days. And it would have been nice if forever, wherever the 12 apostles show up, Christ appears in the breaking of the bread. But then he's only limited to one little place. In the ascension, 40 days later, the idea is that he ascends on high and is seated at the right hand of the Father. That's actually military language of sending out the troops. We're not used to that. But in ancient times, the general would stand on the highest point of a hill to survey the battle and then send the troops in from on high. So when you hear on high, that he was raised on high, it means he's sending us, the troops, out in this battle that we're going to create the world as a place of love. We're the ones who are being sent out. Christ is in heaven. And seated at the right hand of the Father, the right hand is always where whoever is seated at the right hand is the one who issued the orders. So we're the troops, and he's issuing us into this battle of love. And he says, he keeps repeating this, I will not abandon you. He's not abandoning us. The ascension is not about Jesus going up, up, and away, or, just rising above. It's not celebrating a departure. It's celebrating our responsibility. From heaven, he'll be guiding the building of the beloved community. But what he needs is workers. And he keeps repeating in the time of the Easter season, the resurrection, I will not abandon you. He's going to give us the gift of the Holy Spirit. And just that phrase, I will not abandon you, reminds me of this story that years ago during the Armenian earthquake. It was really terrible. There's this earthquake, and this father had just dropped off his son at a kindergarten place, and the earthquake hit, and the kindergarten house was flattened. And the father, in his desperation, he starts moving rubbles to find the kids. And he's working and working. He spends hour after hour after hour. And finally, he just refuses to give up. But he moves one slab of concrete. And the way the building fell in on each other, it created this pocket. And oddly enough, all the kids were saved. So when he pulls that slab away, he hears the son of his voice say, "See, I told you he would show up." Which I think is just this great act of faith. That's a great definition of faith. The son is sitting in darkness. He has no proof, but what he does have is faith that his father will not give up, will never abandon us. Christ will never abandon us, but he does ask us to enter into the fray, to build this world into a community of the beloved community. We baptize in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit because we want to change the world into a place of love. So when people say, well, in the coronavirus, where is Christ? Christ is sending us out, united together in love. We want to convert the world to overcome all the evils. It's Christ directing us. So what does Christ do on the ascension? He sends us out. This is the time that Christ enlists those who are good workers to do the work of love. And so, together, let us stand and renew our baptismal promises.